Welcome, it's your boy, the OGGM, broadcast live from Site B, which looks conveniently like Southern California during the Santa Anas. It is a lovely, hot, dry, windy spring morning here at Site B in Fresno, Nevada. And we're going for a walk since we didn't get one yesterday. But the algae bunnies are in rare form, so we'll see how far we make it before it just becomes impossible for me to breathe or see. Because, yeah, Santa Anas. All right, so you might notice by the topic of the product that I am pontificating on today, we're going to say more nice question mark things about Wizards of the Coast, or more negative things about the people who seem to be trying desperately to find things wrong with Wizards of the Coast to the point where they're just becoming kind of petty. And that seems very hypocritical, considering that I have devoted most of the 15 years or 10 years or however long that I've been doing this to poking holes in Wizards of the Coast. You know, I'm the first to point out the hypocrisy and silliness and just bizarreness of Wizards of the Coast when they do something exceptionally stupid, like the OGL thing. But I'm also the very first person to remind people continuously that for the past 10 years, Wizards of the Coast, well, really since fourth, well, really since 3.5 actually, have made it abundantly clear that what their plans are. So the fact that people are still surprised is either twofold. One is people are still surprised. And we talked about this the other day. And while I find it hard to believe that there's people that somehow still hold out hope, other than J. Scott Garrity, God love him, that Wizards of the Coast will somehow turn a corner or stop doing what they've been doing for the past 10 years, or it's easy. It's easy to jump on the bandwagon and do what I've been doing for the past 15 years and say, oh, look what Wizards of the Coast did, which was fine if Wizards of the Coast has actually done something worth mentioning. But if Wizards of the Coast is continuing to operate as per normal, there's really no reason to go, oh, look, Wizards of the Coast did that. So this week alone, we've got Wizards of the Coast hired 5 new people. And apparently people are surprised, shocked, and insulted that those 5 new individuals are exactly the same as the individuals that they've been working there for the past 5-10 years. Very little experience with D&D. The only experience they have is basically doing Wizards of the Coast grunt work, being offered positions, sideways promotions, if anything, where they're going to get paid less than they would have get paid as an independent to do more, so that Wizards can box some diversity. Dog, go catch up, buddy. Go on, catch up. Hi. Some diversity, whatever, to make an imaginary audience happy. So the fact that people are in shock, surprise, whatever, that the most recent employees, that man was wearing duct tape on his hands, are exactly the same as Mackenzie and all the others. If anything, you should feel bad for these people, that they're going to now be the target of all this hate, and that we'll never know what they're really going to like. We don't know how horrible these people really are, except for at least one of them has done some questionable things, but they're now forced to wear the blanket of shame and suffer the slings of arrows of outraged YouTubers, and be called, just vile things, simply because they chose to take a job for Wizards of the Coast where they will be paid less than they would have been paid as an independent contractor, have less control over the product they create, or the image that they want to project, and have to do more work, and also be, the scapegoats for anything that goes wrong. So whatever the next Wizards of the Coast actual disaster is, people are going to blame these 5 new people. And they went into this knowing that, this is going to happen to them. It's kind of like the people who are jumping ship from one wrestling league to the other wrestling league and expecting that for somehow they're going to be treated different instead of realizing that you're actually going to be treated worse than you were. Like, Aleister Black jumps from WWE to AEW, where he does nothing. Then he jumps from AEW back to WWE because he thinks WWE is going to treat him better. And no, he's stuck in this mid-card vortex because they have no respect for him. Same thing with these guys who have gone to work for Wizards. They're, if they think they're expecting life to be better. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I don't know where we're going, but they're not. It's going to be exactly the same or worse. And they're definitely not going to get paid as much as they got paid doing independent, because when they were independent, they could go do D&D stuff for whoever they wanted. Now they're forced to do stuff for D&D, and then, not have whatever they do go through the various layers of, before it ever sees print. So nothing we see from these people will ever truly be theirs, which, I don't know, I guess kind of sucks. But that's it. Of course, the other thing is that I feel weird that I'm defending Wizards is the whole Wizards hasn't announced anything yet, and Wizards isn't making any money. This is a mystery that has been basically since the beginning of this year. Multiple articles, multiple comments. Most of the doomed dungeon tubers. Oh no, my last video didn't get 64k views. They've all, been sort of harping on two topics. One, money, and how much money D&D, Wizards, Hasbro does or does not have, and we'll get to that in a second. Or the lack of announcement of product for 2026. And this has been the big one. You would think there were other things that were larger in the eyes of the viewing public than the supposed lack of announcements. Now, obviously math is not my strong point, right? And logic is definitely not my strong point. But common sense definitely is something I have in maybe too much abundance. And this is tied in with all the new hires and that brief rumor about a 6th edition, where people are going, A, Wizards hired a bunch of people or cross-promoted a bunch of people. B, Wizards hasn't announced any product. C, Wizards must be working on something really, really big or so drastically different than what we've seen before that it requires them to hire new people and not really announce any projects. Well, there is, of course, one major flaw in this theory, and that is Wizards has announced products. As of today, I believe they've announced, I want to say 20 projects that they're working on, either directly or indirectly. Now, I did read one response to this that makes, where am I going? Am I going to the store? I don't want to go to the store. I didn't bring a bag, so we're not going to the store. Good afternoon.
Good morning.
Is it? Oh, okay, good morning. Wizards hasn't announced any major campaigns yet. And that ties in with the whole Beatles and Grimm is working on a new Platinum thing, so there must be a new campaign, because anytime Bleeders and Grimm does a new Platinum thing, it's linked to the latest campaign. And Wizards has not announced any major campaigns. As long as you ignore Dark Sun. And as long as you ignore Dragonlance. So if we're even holding 10% truth to the whatever they're doing with Dragonlance, and whatever they're doing with Dark Sun, and whatever they're doing with Ravenloft, and whatever they're doing with all this magic-related subclasses, those are all either announcements of a new product or not, depending upon your point of view. But they have not officially said other than, of course, Dark Sun. Which some people are saying, well, they didn't confirm that they're doing Dark Sun. They just hinted they could be doing something else. Really, what else would they be doing that is centered on Dark Sun stuff? And they're going to do Dark Sun at some point in time just to go, aha, we did it. Just like they did with Ravenloft. They said they were never going to do Ravenloft again. They did it. They'll do Dark Sun. It won't be the Dark Sun we love, but they're going to do it. Sounds interesting. Thank you. So let's ignore Dark Sun because it's still sort of in a nebulous bubble. Let's ignore the very definite announcements regarding Dragonlance because we're still not sure what it is. And let's just focus on the other dozen or so projects that we know are coming out directly through Wizards or indirectly through Penguin, Random House, D&D Beyond. The only saving point to this theory that Wizards isn't announcing anything is that, well, they haven't announced another campaign. They haven't announced another Spelljammer. They haven't announced this year's Ravenloft. They haven't announced this year's Player's Handbook 2.0. They haven't announced anything of major consequences to the world, even though they just released the new, Forgotten Realms stuff, but that's technically 2025. The new Forgotten Realms stuff isn't out and didn't come out in 2026. Same with Eberron. Technically, that was a 2025 book, so we could still sort of slide under the, they didn't announce anything. I don't know why it's so important to these individuals to continue to hang on to the very low fruit of Wizards of the Coast hasn't announced anything. And, I will give them the devil's due. If what they're saying is Wizards of the Coast has not announced any campaign books official, because remember, the whole thing about Dark Sun is still maybe, and the whole Dragonlance is, well, they're doing something. It might involve TV, it might involve a book, it might involve a documentary. They're doing something. Then all the other books and projects are D&D Beyond, stuff that they're doing through other companies. There's, little thingies, adventures, one-shots, some new monsters, the crochet book, the coloring book, a bunch of little, I don't know what you call them, fluff. There's nothing major. So then we have to go look at 2025 and go, was there anything major in 2025? Campaign-defining bookends. And yes, there was the Forgotten Realms books and whatever else came out in 2025. But that's not unusual for Wizards to do one-on, one-off. 1 year, they release one or two major things, like the Forgotten Realms books and the Eberron stuff. And the second year, they just release fluff, filler, things to keep the D&D engine running, but no major campaign books. So if they're saying Wizards of the Coast hasn't announced anything because they haven't announced any major campaigns, and we're not counting Dragonlance and Dark Sun because it has not been made official yet, then yes. If that is the reality, then yes, Wizards of the Coast has not announced anything. If we're just saying Wizards of the Coast hasn't announced anything to be angry at them and to find reasons to poke the bear, well, that's stop it, dumb. The same with all the people who are surprised and bad-mouthing the new hires. Stop it. It's not like they're going to change. You should no longer be surprised. Now, the other thing was there was a brief article about Wizards Hasbro being sued. Chris Cox being sued. And a lot of people were like, oh, yay, finally, because they didn't read the rest of the article and was like, well, I'm just reiterating stuff that been happening since 2023 with the whole Magic the Gathering gluck and the price gouging and then bending the truth about the releases of the 2024 Player's Handbook and how many were actually sold as opposed to how many they claimed was sold. And then, of course, Weights and Measures, or whoever it is who researches that stuff. I think it's Weights and Measures, right? Isn't Weights and Measures who it is who determines, inventory versus actual product on hand? Or, I don't know. Does anyone actually know what Weights and Measures does? Anyways, they claimed one thing, and then the actual truth was completely different. They basically lied. So there was product sitting on the shelves in the warehouse, and they claimed there wasn't. So that was a thing, but that's not a new thing. All right. So that brings us 15 minutes in, and we have looked at all this week's I Hate D&D, which all comes up to the, oh no, Wizards isn't making any money. Why would anybody be starting the Wizards isn't making any money when they obviously are? Is D&D still a $1 billion industry? Is Wizards still a $1 billion company? Is Hasbro still a $1 billion? Well, that's because Q1 numbers are about to drop in, what is today? The 5th or the 6th? They drop on the 12th. They drop on the 12th. So we'll know how much money Wizards, Hasbro has made on the 12th. We will have the Q numbers. So we're hedging our bets that Wizards is going to show a loss, that they're not a $1 billion company. They made $1 billion last year, right? Unfortunately, Wall Street is predicting that they're going to show a profit, a 9.8 profit for Q1. Because when you're not really spending money on any product, that's a profit. So I think we're hedging our bets that it's going to be negative, with all these people saying, oh no, they're a $1 billion company still? Yes. Is D&D dead? No. Is anything going to be the D&D killer? No. Stop it. Move on. Let's be positive. Speaking of positive, let's go on to the other topic. Dun 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 dun. Dungeons. Dun dun dun. Dun. Dungeons. That was clever. Hummingbird. All right, if everybody's talking about dungeons, a lot of people are talking about dungeons. A lot of people are talking about their first dungeons. A lot of people are posting maps of their first dungeons. If you still have maps of your first dungeons, copies of your first characters, God love you. I don't. All that stuff got destroyed so many times over. So yeah, that's why I have so few things, and everything's either backed up PDF on multiple sources. But I don't actually own a lot of physical product because I've just lost it so many times over and over again, or found that I never was going to use it. So I'm like, I would love to have a physical copy of this book again, but I'll either lose it, or it'll get destroyed, or I'll never use it. So I'm assuming that this is all because the anniversary of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is coming up this year, and people are celebrating it by talking about their very first dungeons, which of course leads to people making videos about what is a dungeon, which was the very first video I ever made when I started doing this. What is a dungeon? We've talked about that before, because shortly after I posted that video 15 years ago, or 10 years ago, however long it was, a certain individual made a very hate-filled video, took extreme umbrage over my comment that the Death Star was a dungeon, and then refuses to admit that he's done that, claims that I'm lying, and I live in a fantasy world. I wonder who I could be talking about. So what is a dungeon? Because we're talking about dungeons. Well, contrary to popular belief, dungeons are not vast, complex places filled with traps and monsters. The definition of a dungeon is basically jail. Throw them in the dungeon. Did not mean you got to go on a Disneyland ride through the haunted house. No, I meant you got thrown into a small pit or hole in the ground with a gate over it until they decided to do something with you or forgot about you. So that is what a dungeon is. The Alcatraz is a dungeon. The local jail where you live is a dungeon. The Tower of London is a dungeon. So, yeah, it's jail. That's what it is. That's what it was always meant to be. But Dungeons and Dragons has a much more visceral, iconic feel to it than anything else, any other word, deep places in dungeons, trap-filled corridors and dragons, just dragons. So the name works, and we've applied, these ridiculous hallways and builds and tombs and whatever to the name. So what defines a dungeon as opposed to, say, a mega dungeon or anything other contraption? Because anything, i.e. the Death Star, can be a dungeon. Now, why did I use the Death Star? Because I figured at the time everybody knew what it was, right? Bare minimum, what a dungeon is a enclosed environment with very few ways to get in and very few ways to get out. That the DM pretty much has total control over how you go in and how you go out and what happens. There's very little randomness to a dungeon. Dungeons tend to be statics. Dungeons have 1 or 2 stories to tell, and once they're done telling that story, that's pretty much it, right? That's all that really defines a dungeon. Everything else is window dressing and special effects, but really it's 5 rooms, 4 rooms and a door, whatever you want to call it. Orc and pie, threat and reward. But there is finite. There's only so many stories the lost minds of OGGM can tell. There's only so many times you're going to go through and then be like, okay, we found everything that we're going to find. Let's move on. The dungeon usually only has 1 or 2 stories to tell. It's very stagnant. There's very little randomness. Everything is pretty much preset. Sure, there might be random tables for monsters and random ways the monsters might respond and some built-in mechanic to fill empty holes. But if you've already decided that the caves, the lost caves of OGGM have 100 mooks, that's it. They only have 100 mooks. Once the players have gone through those 100 mooks, there's not going to be more mooks. The lost caves of the OGGM, the kidnapped princess is being held by the bad guy in the lost caves. Your job is to go through the lost caves, rescue the princess, bring her back. That's it. That's the only story the dungeon has to tell. Very few entrances, very few exits, very few options. There will be options, of course, because we don't know what you're going to do. But when we write it down on paper and print it out, it's written as a beginning, middle, twist, end. We know there's a start. We know there's an end. In between, there are 5 rooms, right? Or 5 orcs and 5 pies. 5 conflicts, 5 rewards. And we've talked about the 5-room dungeon concept before, and that everything that you're going to encounter in a dungeon can be broken down to these 5 iconic rooms, 5 iconic situations. And you really only need 5 or multiples of that 5 to tell a dungeon. But it's finite. That's what a dungeon is. That's what the Death Star, I love rubbing salt in that wound, is. The Death Star only had 1 story to tell in Star Wars. It had a beginning, a middle, and a very explosive end. There wasn't a lot of other stuff going on with the Death Star in relations to the script of Star Wars. It had a very specific purpose and a very specific scripted end. Someone was going to blow it up. It had to be blown up. That is preconceived, right? There was only so many ways Luke and company could get into the Death Star. There were only so many ways they could leave the Death Star. There was a finite amount of things they could encounter in the Death Star. It wasn't like the dead stormtroopers were going to regrow. No, they would need another spaceship to bring in more stormtroopers, which was not cost effective. The Death Star is, of course, a horrible, cost ineffective experiment that failed to do its job, and yet they built it again twice. You think they would have learned their lesson after the first one, but no, because it was big and intimidating and iconic and they could sell merch. But yeah, it was a dungeon in the sense that It had a beginning, a middle, a twist, an end, and there was only so many things that were going to happen in the Death Star. The Death Star had one story to tell. It had one job: fail to blow up Alderaan. But the impending threat of Alderaan, the impending threat of what the Death Star represented to the, at that point, very small Star Wars universe, opened the doors for understanding that there's more going on than just these guys trying to get these plans, and maybe we need to move on to the next dungeon, move on to the next chapter in the campaign. But the Death Star is like, I've done my job. There's no reason for you to come back here, unless of course they write a horrible plot or whatever. But Death Star 2 Electric Boogaloo isn't my concern. My concern is to tell the story of Princess getting kidnapped, goblins with sticks, rescuing Princess escaping, exposing weakness to the Death Star for whatever reason not aware of the weakness. Heroes destroy the Death Star before it reaches Alderaan, and in so discovering that there is a larger plot beyond just rescue Princess. Now that I've done my job, I can retire and milk those merchandising royalties until they remake me or whatever. But yeah, so yes, I'm sorry, the Death Star is a dungeon. And that is, your favorite movie notwithstanding, I could say Alcatraz was a dungeon, and Escape from Alcatraz and The Rock are both stories about that dungeon. I could have said the Titanic was a dungeon. I could have said the burning of London was a dungeon. I could have said anything was a dungeon, because a dungeon does not have to be underground. It does not have to be filled with Tomb of Horrors levels of traps. All the dungeon has to do is offer very few ways in, very few ways out, a very limited, finite story. There's only so many stories Alcatraz has to tell. There's only so many stories the Titanic has to tell. There's only so many stories Die Hard has to tell. Beginning, middle, twist, end, done. Never have to go back. Which of course then opens the whole thought experiment. Well, what happens to the dungeon after? What happens to the Tomb of Horrors after? What happens to the lost cave of the OGGM after? Because that's a lot of potential property that could be gone to use. And if things like that mattered in D&D, that could be a whole thought experiment where we're like, okay, well, the main characters are done, but all that stuff is still there. Somebody else could find a use for it, right? We, the villagers, should be picking that place clean for supplies. Me, the potentially next new bad guy, should be picking that place clean for supplies. That's not to say that's not happening, but we don't see it. It's not important to our story. It's not important to Luke and Han's story, what's going on behind the scenes with the rest of the Empire. They've gone through the dungeon. Now, if you were doing like a Bro SR 1.1 whatever type campaign, then yeah, maybe considering what to do with all that suddenly available property is a good thing to drop in the water. But the dungeon has told its story. The Death Star has told its story. Hello, top fans. Please like, please share, please subscribe, please support by hitting that, icon, whatever. So yeah, we're talking about dungeons. That's my theory on dungeons, and that's why I use the Death Star, because I assume everybody knows it. But I could use Alcatraz, instead if you want. Really doesn't matter. The theme is the same. It doesn't matter the location. The traps, the tricks, the monsters, that's all window dressing. That's all fluff. The basic cake is still the basic cake. Beginning, middle, twist, end. Limited ways in, limited ways out, limited things that are going to happen. Once it's done telling its story, it really has nothing else to do. As opposed to open-ended mega dungeons, hex crawls, point crawls, city crawls. Those are completely different life forms, and we'll talk about those in a different video. Because, yeah, the weather's changing again. And now they're saying it might rain. Fresno, Arizona, ladies and gentlemen. If you're going to live in some place that doesn't exist, you could at least have made up better weather. Now, I will say for anybody else who says, what are you talking about? The weather's beautiful. Yes, the weather is amazing, unless you're me. The reason why I moved to Fresno, Nevada all those years ago was because supposedly the weather was better for my headaches, for my health, and for my depression and my allergies. Turns out that was completely wrong. This is now quite possibly the worst possible ways for somebody who suffers from what I suffer to live. It is literally environmentally going against everything I need to constantly place me in a position of suffering. I am the man of constant sorrow. I've seen trouble all my days.